Yay, Kat.
Yay.
Lovely to see you.
All right. Olivia, there's a button in your upper right-hand corner if you can find it. Hi, everyone. We are delighted to be here. That's delicious. What a lovely, wonderful session to be able to follow, and so many threads to pull from there as we go. Olivia, I'll let you find that button in the upper right-hand corner as you go. We're from Coppet, which is an applied storytelling consultancy based in the US and other places. Among other things, we also are improvisers. We run an improvisational theater company here. So we are, as Artem said, co-creating narrative on the spot, not just with our colleagues on the stage, but also with audiences all the time. For example, just last week, we asked the audience for an example of a location, and they gave us a drain pipe, like a big open drain pipe. Two improvisers got on stage. We asked them for a small location. We got a drain pipe. Two improvisers stood very, very close together, hugging each other tight. And the first improviser said, "I can't help but feel a little bit responsible." And the lighting improviser immediately turned off the lights. That was the entire scene, the entire story. Right. Yes, exactly. So
that was great.
Right. So to me, this is a perfect example of co-created narrative, right? So one line, but the audience, this is in a format called theater sports created by the great Keith Johnstone, where there are scores at the end of the scene. The challenge had been a scene in a small place. So, and the scores, the judges gave this scene a perfect score. It got the highest scores of the night. The audience created a story in their own minds, much beyond what the actors said. The lighting improviser made that story happen as much as the improvisers who said the lines. Everybody in that room created whatever that story was together. They made it happen together. And of course, that's what happens all the time. It was just evident in that way. As a matter of fact, the improvisers came off stage and the audience was giving them all sorts of praise, and they were like, "We didn't do it." It was the lighting improviser. The lighting improviser had the good idea. The lighting improviser was like, "I didn't do it. You had the funny idea." The audience was like, "You people are all brilliant." So we would like to break down a little bit, a couple of things in our time together with you. We'd like to talk a little bit about our philosophy about storytelling, which is maybe a little bit provocative in this space. And then in terms of our definition of story, and then share with you some of the different collective storytelling activities that we have to offer to you to make explicitly this activity of co-creating narrative that we're all doing all the time. So,
I guess that totally deserves the fire. If you need the slides, just let me know and I'm off the air. Thank you both for being here. Great story, and I'm really anticipating it.
Great. Yeah, let's pull up some slides. Look at some slides, and then maybe we'll take them down. And Livia will be here to be my partner as we go along. All right. So story, I'm assuming that we all have our definitions of storytelling, and that I am speaking to and co-creating this narrative together with a bunch of experts who have all sorts of definitions and all sorts of beliefs about story. And I was really taken in our last session with Noah Baum about how beautifully she talked about the power of core stories. What we believe about story is what Jerome Bruner, the cognitive psychologist, said, which is that story is meaning. That is the way we as human beings make sense of the world. And, you know, you said your son said, the world just is, right? Things just are. Story is. And as you said, it could be used for good or evil. But even more than that, it is beyond anecdote. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but that we are swimming in story all the time, and we can recognize it or not, we can capture it or not, we can choose to use it consciously or not, but it is what our brains are doing all the time. It is how we make sense of the world. And as human beings, it is the thing that motivates us, and that it is our superpower in a way that is at the sort of core of all culture, all connection, much of our intellectual pursuits, and sort of our beingness as human beings. Or as Yuval Harari says, you could never convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising him limitless bananas after death in monkey heaven. But for human beings, that seems to work. It motivates us in all sorts of ways. So we know the power of story. Speaker after speaker after speaker in this entire conference has been telling us, and the world seems to be coming to the power of story. Again, for good or evil, it shifts mindsets, it motivates us, it deepens our understanding. And we have these core stories that we use as metaphors, as touchstone. In all cultures, we have these, whether it's the tortoise and the hare, or a family story that we have, whether they are core truths that we hold on to. Where is the circle becomes the question that we draw. This is story, this is not. And when I said I think we're a little provocative, there's a way that we're pushing, I think, sometimes against the tide to define story more openly and more broadly than some of our colleagues. Because we do think that story is such a connection that we want to expand beyond just, I'm telling you a story with a beginning, middle, and end, that I am telling where it's an anecdote, the way I did to start us off about my colleagues on the improv stage, to seeking the story in the space. So at one end of this spectrum, is it a story? Is there a change over time? Like, is something true and then there's a shift and now something is new is true? That's one way people define story. At the other end of this spectrum is like, it's a movie with all sorts of production values and really structured, owned narrative. You know, this is a story separate from everything else around it. People have different definitions. This is story, this is not story. We're way over on the, if there's something's true and then there's a shift, then it's story. And that's happening all the time in our brains, individually and collectively. Or put another way, we think story is fractal, and that it's happening at lots of different levels all the time, and that we are inviting individuals and groups to embrace their story awareness and the way that we are co-creating narrative all the time at all three of these levels. So the main way that we talk about story and that we explore story as a community when we're talking about story and the power of storytelling is at this anecdote level. And I think that that's what we were just hearing in the last session. That's how we started out today. And don't get me wrong, the power of the anecdote, of story sharing, is profound, right? And we just heard about the difference between sitting opposite someone and hearing them share an experience, and how different that is from the activity of arguing a point. So that is deeply profound, or examining what is a specific memory or a specific experience. No argument there. And that's just one place that the power of narrative can live. Another is recognizing that any moment in which there is this shift over time, I can think of as a story. So today's session for you, we can think of as a narrative arc. So at the beginning, how are people feeling about the idea of co-creating narrative? What does that mean to you when you walk in? And how might we want you to think of it differently at the beginning, at the end, when we're done? So I think that there's this opportunity for me to co-create narrative, and it's this big. And at the end, we want you to think it's this big. That's a beginning, middle, and end structure. And if we go even bigger, we can think about the ambient narratives. What are the stories that we're swimming in? What are the assumptions we're making? So in our improv theater, maybe people enter our theater with the ambient narrative that, oh, the creative people are on the stage and they are the storytellers. And when they leave the theater, the ambient narrative is, wow, look what we created together, or I'm a really creative person, or I could do that, or I just made a show. Noah Baum just told us amazing versions of ambient narratives about others that we have that get shifted through the anecdotes that we share. So when we start to look at these three levels as all stories, then we start to say, at all of those levels, we can recognize that we are co-creating narratives, and we can co-create at all three levels of those. So let's just take this idea of change over time being the definition of story, and how might we co-create narrative at this very simple level? Well, I started by saying we're organizational development consultants. Everything that we do is brought in to say, how do we help people change, right? So any moment of change can be thought of really fundamentally as a storytelling activity. Sometimes we start by letting people share their stories this simply. So we'll have people mill around and just share, like, this is true for me. And then, like, well, for example, in a management training class, we might say, like, I was an individual contributor, then I became a manager, now this is true for me, to gather a needs assessment. Or at the end of that session, they may say, I used to think this about being a manager, then I took this course, now this is new true for me. As a group, we can do that same activity. So the group can say, we used to be like this, and have everyone sort of share what was true for us before and get their voices into the room collectively telling that story. Then what changed? Here's what changed. And we can individually and collectively add our voices in and then build the next. We can do this verbally, we can do it visually. But as soon as we give folks this structure, that's all they need to be able to co-create a narrative, by recognizing it's just very simply, there was something, then something shifted, then something changed. If we want to make it an even more complex, but not that much more complex structure, we can give them a simple spine of a story and have people build. So co-creating narrative, we can do this one sentence at a time with groups to have them build the narrative, or have the whole group work on it together, but just giving a simple scaffold for a story. And there are many stories that groups can tell for themselves. So they can build the history of their group using this. They can tell the story of the future. They can solve problems using this spine together. So what's a problem that we have? What's one thing that we could do to change it, which is a catalyst? What would be the consequences of that? Until finally, and ever since then. So here's an example of that. Let me give you an example of how we could use this with a group to have them co-create a story of the future. So lots and lots of groups do visioning activities, but it's one thing to just have the vision. If we turn it into a storytelling activity, then all of a sudden you have all the power of story given to the group. So the future state is, here's our vision. However you get to your vision, using whatever tools you have to get to your vision, and there are many of them, and then you give them the story spine, all of a sudden you say, all right, so where are we today? You can envision your story of where we are today. You can use anecdotes to share where you are in your current state. You can use anecdotes to share how your vision will be realized, and then use the Uber story to get from here's where we are, here's where we want to be. Your spine will fill in the gap. So what is the one thing that is the catalyst to get you from where you are today to where you're going to be? In improv, probably the most famous rule is the yes and rule. Some of you may have heard of it, but it is not, it doesn't mean what everybody thinks it means, to quote the Princess Bride. It doesn't just mean agreeing. It really means accepting and building on what your partner offers. And if we're going to co-create narrative, we have to listen and receive the offers that our partners give us. Someone says, I somehow feel responsible for this. The lighting improviser hears and goes, oh, that's the whole story right there, and brings down the lights. That's a yes and, accepting that offer and seeing it and believing it. So sometimes a great way to co-create a narrative is simply to ask a group to tell a sentence at a time story, starting with the words yes and. This is a great way to build listening skills. If we want people to be good at listening to stories, we can help them exercise those muscles of listening as storytellers. And it's a great way to have people build collective group acceptance. And you can also have content in your stories. So Livia, if you and I were going to do this, how might we, let's just do a yes and story together. Give me a suggestion of something to tell a story around.
How about cold weather?
Great. So we're going to tell the story in the third person so we can collectively focus on the story in the middle of what we're doing. Bernard hated cold weather.
Yes, and he hated it so much that he closed up all of the doors and the windows and any crack of air that would get into his house.
Yes, and he was so enclosed in his house that not one sound or person or any peep of anything that was happening outside his house could get in.
Yes, and he didn't hear when a parade went through town that was made to celebrate Bernard.
Yes, and because he didn't hear the parade, all of his friends and family that were there to celebrate him wondered why he didn't come out and say hello and wave when they were shouting his name and cheering for him.
Yes, and they became so concerned that they surrounded his house and started knocking on the doors and saw the stuffing and the cloth and everything keeping him enclosed in his house.
And because they saw all the stuffing and things keeping him inside, his little nephew said, "Oh, I bet he's trying to stay warm."
And because of that, the family and everyone who was there to celebrate him decided to pool all of their resources and make beautiful sweaters and coats and hats. And they made one final attempt to break through to reach Bernard.
Yes, and they did this by pushing the sweaters and hats down his chimney so that he could see them all in the thing and get warm enough to want to open the door.
Yes, and Bernard saw these things come through his chimney. He recognized some of the fabric pieces as those belonging to his family. He saw a square from his nephew's favorite coat. He put on the clothes, opened the doors, and saw everyone standing in front of him.
Yes, and when they saw him standing all bundled up and he saw the big parade, they realized that they'd figured out a way to celebrate his birthday in an appropriate way that he could appreciate, and Bernard finally felt loved. The end. I think that's the end.
I think yes.
So that is a way to co-create a narrative. I don't know, Olivia, do you want to say anything about that story for you, or how it was to do that as we were going along?
Yeah, I think always when telling this story together, I have to be conscious of letting go of ideas that I might have. If it was just me telling the story, maybe it would have gone this way, but that's not the point of what we're doing. We're creating something together, and even though it's can be tricky to let go of certain ideas, it always ends up being a more full and fulfilling story every time it's collaborative.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. That no matter what I've planned or what I think is a good idea or is interesting or original, it's never going to be as good as if I'm yes-anding and following and building with my partner. And we talk about brick by brick. Yeah. Beautiful. So there are there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of ways to co-create narrative. And and some of it is just listening, right? And building together and knowing that you're doing that. But in terms of activities like this to exercise or play, here's just a minor list of ways this could work. So I talked about vision stories. We used the story spine to do that. You can or cannot give a template like that, but simply just having your vision and then having your current state and building in between. Story circles is a format that I'm sure lots of this audience is very familiar with, but the idea is connected very much to what Noah Baum was talking about. Rather than setting up a debate or advice giving, having a topic and then having people share experiences or anecdotes around that topic, and then surfacing themes. So that's really individual anecdote sharing and then coming together around themes or problem solving based on what you learned from those. A line at a time or a word at a time. We just showed you the yes and version of that. A word at a time, it would look like this. So Olivia, we can do that. So we can just go from nothing. So I'd go once
upon time
there
lived
a
girl
who
went
to
a
beauty
pageant
and
decided
to
take
a
nap.
Good. We'll stop there. I realize people are translating. That was terrible to do to them. But yes. So even more co-creating, even less control. Great. String of pearls. If you want to turn up the exercising the muscles of listening and co-creating, is a line at a time story out of order. So you have someone tell a line of a story and then someone else tell another line of a story, and then have people try to fill in gaps where, so just fill in a line of a story and then somewhere else and somewhere else to see if you can create the story out of order and have it be coherent. Again, these can be about trying to get the meaning, but also just exercise muscles of connection and team building. Story swap is an activity we use where we have people share stories in pairs and then find new pairs and tell the story they just heard as if it's their own story, and then swap and tell the story they just heard, and then come back and share the story they just heard. It's sort of a giant collective telephone game. It's a way of exercising listening muscles. It's also a way of getting the group to know each other. People can claim their story back and correct it if they want, but it's a playful way of story sharing and getting to know each other that sort of gamifies the group owning group stories. And telephone game is a version of that where you just have one person stand up and tell it to another person with two people out of the room. Person 3 comes in, hears the story from person 2. Person 4 comes in and hears it from 3. 4 tells it to the group. So people can see how stories change and morph and what we don't hear and what we don't listen to. Conducted story is you have a line of people and you point randomly to the person to tell the next part of the story. Again, these are ways of randomizing who goes next so that we can avoid planning and we can be present in the moment. Tag team story is a conducted story where the storytellers tag in themselves rather than being pointed to. Worst future, best future is a great group game where you have the group collectively create a picture of their vision, which often we do with groups, but also create a vision, their sort of dark vision of what they're afraid of, and having both of those visions there, then talk about what would be the path that would get you here, what would be the path that would get you here, and what choices you might make. You know, what would be the narrative structure that would get you to either of those places, and what are the choices you might make. So it's sort of reverse problem solving. Tell that story is an activity where you go around a circle and you can have folks just do word association. So we can demo this, Livia. So I might say raspberries.
I remember my backyard of my childhood home had a single raspberry bush in the back. And I was always the first person of the season to see when they were perfectly ripe. I took a lot of pride in that.
Great, beautiful. And so Livia tells her story. I can pick one word out of that. And like I might say, pride reminds me of, and tell that story. Or I might just say pride. And then the next person could do a word associated to pride and might say lion. And the next person could say whatever word. And at some point, someone might say, tell that story. So we can go around the circle with word association, and every now and then someone says, tell that story, or we can just go story to story, free associating from word by word. Sometimes we call that, we call it tell that story. Sometimes it's called port key, after the Harry Potter stories where the object transports you to a new place. And then remember when is the final example we'll give here. When you have people co-create fictional stories together about a memory that they share. So I might say, give me a suggestion, Livia.
Trampoline.
Trampoline. Oh yes, Livia, remember that time when we were kids together and we had a trampoline in the backyard?
Oh my gosh. And I remember there was one corner that you had to stay away from or you would fall right through. It was a little rickety.
Yes. And oh, right. I remember. And there was that one time when you fell through.
Yep. And that's where I have that scar going all the way down my leg. And it's a good story to tell.
Yeah, well, it was actually, it turned out okay, because when we went to the hospital, you met Fred.
That's right. Yep. Fred was the nurse on duty. It was meant to be. And I appreciated you giving him my number when I was a little bit hesitant.
That's right. So those are just a few of the kinds of ways you can play with co-creating story. Livia, maybe I will have you do one last story, and I can take these down, I think. Can I take them down? Maybe I can. Yes.
There we go.
There we go. But I will ask you to do one more storytelling for our folks, and then maybe we'll have some questions, which is simply, I'm going to give you 3 random words, and you can tell a story to bring us home. So these can be sourced from the group. This is a great way to help people exercise having a story maybe that they are used to telling or that's important to them, but then being present with a group and incorporating what's actually happening. Let's see, what do I have around me that we haven't used? Sunglasses, polar bear, and cheese.
Excellent. Once there was a group of scientists who were exploring the North Pole, looking for a very particular polar bear who was said to have the cutest polar bear babies in existence. They had done some research and discovered that if they used cheese as a lure, then the polar bear they were looking for would find them. Before they went out, they got all geared up. They grabbed their cheese. They grabbed their sunglasses. It's very bright, lots of white snow, and put the cheese out, and it worked. The polar bears came up, started eating, and it was the cutest thing ever. It broke all the scientific cuteness scales, and they were able to sell thousands and thousands of calendars and put the money towards climate change reversal initiatives.
And there you go. So go out, tell stories with other people, use all of your storytelling skills, and remember, story is meaning, so you are telling story all the time. Thanks, Artem.
This ding when I came online, this thing
Ding.
is like exactly what I feel right now. This is so refreshing in the evening. Thank you so much, Kat, Livia. You were wonderful.
Thank you.
So, if anyone has questions to Kat and Livia, that now would be a great time to ask them. And I'll share some contacts of yours, some links. And I actually do have a question for you.
Yes.
So, since you are like very good in terms of improv, as we can see, obviously, I know that improv is becoming more and more important, given that we live in a very, very unstable world. So, what is the main message you would like improv could teach the business leaders about not just sharing the story on the go for fun, but about crafting the story and making meaning for the people who are following you?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think, the same way we say we're telling stories all the time, that story is meaning, I think we are improvisers. We're improvising all the time. And I think there are 2 core things that we're really bringing from improv when we're working with leaders. The first is about expanding awareness. Improv is really about being as present as you can be and receiving as much as you can receive. What are the offers that are in the space? How can I pay attention? So as leaders, how can we be really present and say what is needed, who are my partners? How do I support them? How do I build with what exists in this moment? What's needed? How do I serve the scene that I'm in? What scene am I in and how do I serve it? And then the second is, how do I expand my range of options, right? So there's a way that, people can get very seduced by these ideas of like personality typing and, this is my personality or this is how I am supposed to be all the time. And what's lovely about improv is it's about flexibility, right? It's about, I can play this character, I can perform in this way. So how do we expand our range and our adaptability to flex with what's needed? So even in terms of just storytelling, right? What is the kind of story that's needed right now? What are my habitual ways of telling story or the habitual types of stories that I might tell? And how can I expand that? How can I really think about, just that, like thinking of myself as a performer who can expand what I would do as opposed to being stuck.
I love your answer. And this shows the level of your practice. I mean, a person who just knows the techniques wouldn't be able to, comprehend how it's transported. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, I see there are a lot of comments on the session, like during the talk, and people are writing that this is very refreshing. I have some personal messages actually on my phone saying, how are they doing it? It's like, is there a script? And I'm like, no, seriously, like year after year, no script.
No script. Livia is one of my secret weapon. She's just brilliant. And as a facilitator, as a coach, she's available for coaching if anybody wants her, and also just as a performer, as you see.
I appreciate that.
That's true. We have one more question coming from Vinod, a very active participant. Vinod, thank you so much. He's writing, I am curious to know how you would approach people in groups who find it uncomfortable to partake in the improv or story activity.
Yeah, Livia, do you want to?
Well, believe it or not, I am an introverted, shy person. So I have some personal experience with this. One of the core principles of improvisation is to make your partner look good. So before we engage in any of these activities, we make sure that participants know they're not going to be put on the spot. You're not going to be forced into anything. And this isn't like stand-up comedy where you may be the butt of a joke or put into an uncomfortable position just because. What we're doing is we're going to make sure that you look good. And what we say is that part of this is to get comfortable, as Kat was saying, kind of expanding your range, getting comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable and pushing yourself to have that growth. It doesn't mean that you're going to be put in an unsafe position. We will trust you to adjust that for yourself. But we acknowledge that it can be a bit of a stretch, and we say, welcome and take that risk, and know that we're here to make you look good. We're here to support you. So we're not going to put you in a position to make you look anything other than fantastic.
I love how your answer correlates with what Jill and Jean were talking about, dignifying and keeping the dignity of the person. Yeah. And I guess this is like a thread, one of the main threads to the whole conference. Thank you so much. This is so wise.
Yeah.
Wow. And Vinod is writing, maintaining the space safe is the key. So he thanks you. I guess I have one more question for you. And I would like you both to answer it, actually. So by coming to this conference, you proved that people can build bridges and borders are not any stopping factor. This is a great meaning that could inspire people. And I want to know what other meaning, one, you would like to inspire people about so we can live in a world with more bridges in it.
You know, Livia mentioned this improv principle of focusing on your partner and making your partner look good. I think that it's at the heart of, ultimately, it's at the heart of the difference between co-creating narrative, really connecting, and sometimes when I'll speak for myself. Sometimes when I start to think about my stories, I can get very focused on how do I look or how do I sound or how people are going to receive my story and what's my story. And when I'm really connected to what's the gift that I have to offer, how can I help, how can I serve the scene that I'm in, what does the scene need, that's when I really feel like I'm building a bridge and connecting. David Augsburger, who's a theologian, has a great quote that we quote all the time. Your folks probably have heard it from other people as well, but I'll share it here. He says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. And I think as storytellers, recognizing how important it is to be heard is really lovely. And so remembering that how our power to solicit stories and to listen as storytellers, as I know a lot of your folks were talking about, is really what building bridges is about.
I second that, absolutely. I'll add the last part is, I think there is something joyful and playful that can come from telling and sharing story and in improv. And I think if everything was a little bit more playful, then we're going to be more likely to connect. So inviting more play and joy is another element that I would advocate for.
Love it. Thank you so much. Focusing on the other and keeping the playfulness. Thank you. Those are great meanings. You've done such a terrific job for making this day a final very refreshing and playful and deep point. So all those fires are for you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Artem. What a wonderful thing you do every year. And we'll see you soon.
See you. Such a long day. I thank everyone who is still with us this evening, as there is no no pleasure without the person to give the gift to, and there is no story without the listener. So there is no conference without you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a lovely day, and we will continue tomorrow at 9:20.